So, Garrett, what do we expect to happen today at the White House?
Well, Jose, at some point during this meeting, which really has three separate components, so an Oval Office meeting, a private lunch, and a news conference, we will see the two presidents sign this minerals development deal that's been in the work between the two administrations for some time. And I expect most of the conversation to be about their two essentially different versions of what a future partnership between the U.S. and Ukraine looks like. The president's version, President Trump's version, focusing heavily on economic engagement, especially with this minerals deal. And President Zelensky expected to continue to push for more robust security guarantees from the United States, both now and in the event that a peace deal or a ceasefire deal is ultimately signed. That's been a point of contention between the two leaders in recent weeks, although the president notably softened his tone about Zelensky yesterday, suggesting this might be a more positive engagement today than we might have expected it to be 24 hours ago.
Yeah, and Garrett, it looks as though things are about to, happen right now. Of course, we'll keep that live picture up. But Keir, meanwhile, how do we know how this deal got made in the first place?
Well, the deal has been fraught. It's been difficult. The idea has been, if you like, to offer President Trump a kind of an economic justification for supporting Ukraine, if not militarily. Now, initially, the Ukrainians didn't want to sign the paper that was put in front of them some days ago, some weeks ago in Ukraine. Now it looks like Zelensky will sign. The details are sketchy, though, Jose, exactly what it is that they are signing up to. And frankly, some of Ukraine's rare earths and minerals are a long way off in terms of establishing how much there is and getting to the point of mining and making money from it. I think another interesting aspect with President Trump, what we've seen this week, a full court press by the Europeans to kind of try and get him back on side, to wrestle him away from how close he was appearing to be to President Putin and the Russians politically. What we've seen from President Trump, which I think is fascinating, and it happened again yesterday, is him now describe the prospects of a peace deal as difficult, that it's going to be hard. He said yesterday, either it's going to happen quickly or it won't happen at all. That's quite a substantial shift from the campaign. And I think that is a glimpse into actually how many challenges the Trump administration is realizing are there with the Russians and also, of course, with the Ukrainians and with President Zelensky, who President Trump is about to meet.
Yeah, and Ambassador, let's talk about those challenges, because it does seem, as Keir's brilliantly pointing out, that there has been a change in tone from the White House about what the prospects of a ceasefire or end to that war could look like. What do you think are the biggest challenges?
Well, I'm glad to see that the president's tone has changed, because this will be a very difficult conversation, even if you get the Russians and the Ukrainians both at the table. Unfortunately, I think the president has made several concessions over the last 2 weeks to the Russian position. Today is an opportunity for him to make a course correction. The two big questions for any settlement negotiations are going to be what happens to territory under Russian control, but also security guarantees. And that's very important to Zelensky, because he suggested at the end of last year, I'd be prepared for Ukraine to agree we would not try to recover lost territory using military force. But he also wants a very strong security guarantee, because he does not want to do a deal now and then give the Russians 3 years to recuperate and regenerate their military force, and then have Vladimir Putin launch a new invasion down the road. So he's looking for a solid guarantee. Ideally, in his view, it would be NATO membership. But if not NATO membership, then something that is very firm that he would see as deterring a Russian attack in the future. And that'll be a topic.
Ambassador, I'm curious, you said that already the United States gave concessions to Russia on this. What do you see as those concessions being?
Well, the two big issues in this negotiation are territory and security guarantees. 2 weeks ago, the president and the Secretary of Defense said Ukraine can't get all of its territory back and Ukraine can't get NATO membership. I don't know why at the beginning of a negotiation, before the Russians and the Ukrainians are even at the table, the United States is already suggesting those things. I think also that the way the Russians negotiate, they're going to be encouraged to sit back and expect more concessions. And that's not the way to deal with Moscow. Hopefully today is an opportunity for the president to correct course and get back towards a more appropriate position for the United States if we're trying to broker a real settlement.
And Christina, I mean, there's, talk about change of tone. There's also change of rhetoric. Last week, the president called Zelensky a dictator. On the eve of his visit, this is what he said about that issue.
Do you still think that Mr. Zelensky is a dictator?
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
What do you think of this? And I'm just thinking, Christina, this, rare mineral deal, do you think that it could have some substantial impact on the possible ending of the war?
So I think a couple things are going on here. I would say that was a BBC reporter who asked that question. That response I call the Macron effect. Emmanuel Macron has figured out how to kind of move Trump in the direction that Europe wants. And you saw that in that Oval Office meeting between the two of them. And on the heels of that, you saw the British PM come over, ingratiate himself, give President Trump a letter from King Charles inviting him for a second state visit, something that no one else has gotten. He was very excited about that. So this is the influence of these visits by European leaders. And look, there's a reason you're seeing all these people come here to D.C., including Zelensky, because this is how Trump likes to do business. And there's also this issue of object permanence. We've heard from people who've dealt with him before. He usually tends to go with the last thing that was in the room. So they're trying to sway him to get to this deal. Now, when it comes to the deal, this could be a win for Trump. It may not be everything it's cracked up to be, as my colleagues here have said. It's allegedly a $50 billion deal to develop these resources. It's not back-facing. It won't go to pay down debts the U.S. or alleged debts, Trump says, the U.S. has already incurred, paying for this war. The other thing is it's based off survey maps the Soviets did 50, 60 years ago. These are not minerals. This is not a mine that they can roll into and start taking money out of. They have to survey. They have to go in. And a lot of these resources are actually in territories currently controlled by Russia.
Keir, do we have any response from Russia to this U.S.-Ukraine agreement?
Well, Russia is watching and waiting and negotiating. I think there's an interesting aspect to this, Jose, which is that we talk about who's going to be at the table when the negotiations happen. Will it be Ukraine, Russia, the Europeans? The negotiations are happening now. You're hearing from President Putin and members of his Kremlin officials all the time, consistently, and they're trying to send messages. So effectively what's happening is you're actually watching these negotiations happen in plain sight, as we mentioned, with the Europeans in Washington, with now Zelensky there today. In terms of what the Russians want, if you like, I think it's interesting that we focus a lot on what's going to happen in Ukraine. What I think we saw from the meetings in Saudi Arabia, and particularly because from President Putin sending a man he's now appointed as an envoy to be there to just talk about economics. What I read from that was the Russians are really interested in trying to get sanctions lifted, trying to have a bilateral economic relationship with America that it hasn't had for years. That they would be satisfied with that, even if there is no deal over Ukraine. And I suspect behind closed doors that conversation has been happening with President Trump to say, well, hold on a second, the sanctions that we have on Russia are our leverage in order to try and get a deal with Ukraine. Another point with all of this, the Russians have around 80,000 troops, including just over 10,000 North Korean troops around the Kursk region, which, of course, is a small piece of land that was taken by the Ukrainians. Those troops are there to try and get that land back. It looks as if that is an offensive that Russia is still planning and trying to. More North Korean troops just got sent, according to the South Koreans. All of that suggests that President Putin would be prepared to keep fighting, isn't necessarily rushing to try and get a ceasefire anytime soon. But what he would like, he already likes talking directly with the US and in that kind of bilateral setting. What he would love is to get to some kind of a place where there was a change to the sanctions and a change to the economic relationship. But that's what he has been trying to get for years.
Yeah, and Ambassador, just thinking as the past being, such an important pattern of what we can expect in the future, and I'm just What do you see as what Russia has learned from its experience in Ukraine over the years and the reaction of the United States to it? And I'm thinking, for example, February 2014, when there was, I don't know how to describe the action or inaction of the United States to that. What do you think that has taught Russia vis-a-vis the United States?
Yeah, no, I think after February 2014, when Russia illegally seized Crimea and then annexed it, had there been a harsher Western reaction, it might have sent a different message to Moscow. Though I'm not sure in the end that it would have deterred Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin seems to have this neo-imperialistic drive to recover parts of the Russian Empire that were lost when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. So he talks about Ukraine as what he calls historic Russian territory, territory that was once Russian. And that appears to be his drive. That led him to make what I regard as in an epic blunder, the invasion in 2022. And lots of indications suggest the Russians were expecting to be welcomed by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians reported early on that they shot up a Russian convoy just north of Kyiv. And one of the trucks was full not with ammunition or fuel or food. It was full of brand new dress uniforms for the victory parade that the Russians hope to stage in Kyiv. This war now, I think, has been immensely costly. More than 800,000 Russian soldiers killed and wounded in action, the economic sanctions, huge amounts of Russian military equipment destroyed. I would have said 3 years ago that Russia was a state in decline. If anything, I think Putin's blunder has accelerated that decline.